My name is Madison. I am 33, and I was halfway through garlic bread when my parents announced I would host my sister's $10,000 baby shower. The water glass left a cold ring on the table while my phone buzzed with a charge I never approved. A quiet question rose in me. Since when did being helpful mean being owned? Before we really begin, tell me where you are listening from. Tap like and subscribe, and stay for how I finally drew a line today. I parked 2 blocks from the Italian place and listened to the engine tick in the early Columbus evening. Inside my tote sat 2 constants, a budget notebook, and the worn wallet I bought used the year I paid off my student card. I touched the wallet by habit before I opened the door. Garlic and butter drifted out to the sidewalk. At the host stand I said, "Madison, party of 5, and followed the server past prints of sunlit vineyards. Mom and Dad were already in the corner booth shaped like a half moon. Laura had the careful hair and calm smile she keeps for anything that might become a photo. Rick wore the soft grin that says, "Problems yield if we are all pleasant enough." Isabella sat beside Ethan, palm resting on the curve of her stomach, eyes bright with hope. Ethan kept glancing at prices on the menu like they were cliffs. I slid in and gave her a smile that promised I would try to make things easier if I could. I am 33 and work in accounts receivable at a logistics company. The job is steadier than it sounds. Numbers are a way to be kind without losing clarity. I rent half a duplex, drive an old sedan, and move money into an emergency fund every payday. My downstairs neighbor grows tomatoes and leaves a paper bag on my step in summer. Last year, I learned a lesson I still carry. Isabella's car died in a lot, and the tow shop wanted money she did not have. I co-signed a small repair loan and believed the word temporary. It took 6 months to unwind. I did not resent her. I did remember the stress of every notice. Another lesson arrived when Grandma was in the hospital. I put a motel room on my card for my parents, then called the desk the next morning to remove it from the file. The clerk promised. I believed her. Mom's text had called tonight a small family dinner to talk shower ideas. I pictured notepads, a plate of bread between us, and a plan that looked like a community center with homemade touches. Laura greeted me with a kiss on the cheek and set a manila folder by her elbow. Rick patted it like numbers inside would behave. Isabella showed me a board of peach and sage decorations. It was sweet and simple. Ethan slipped an arm around her chair and wore the face of a man who wanted to give her the world with coupons, if that is what it took. I offered what I knew I could do without wobbling. I would bake cupcakes, make invitations on cardstock, set up chairs, be the last one sweeping. I would buy a few centerpieces. The table went a beat too quiet. Mom smiled wider, the way she does when she is steering. Dad said his favorite line, "We have it covered." In my tote, my phone buzzed. On the lock screen, a subject line peeked through. Maple Hall Events, payment confirmation. I set the tote down, as if putting weight on it could press the words back into the screen. I reached for water. The glass left a cold ring that the napkins soaked up slowly until the ink on an old receipt blurred at the edge. Luis, the server, came by with a smile and a pencil tucked behind his ear. Silverware chimed against plates, the room low, a song from the 70s coasting under the talk. Bread landed on the table in a basket lined with paper, steam rising like the loaf had its own breath. When did planning turn into deciding for me? The first plates had not arrived when the reveal dropped. Mom lifted the manila folder like a ribboned box and announced we had Maple Hall for Isabella's shower. She said all in, $10,000, as if that were a decorative phrase. Dad added the deposit was already placed so we would not lose the date and the rest could be sorted out after. My phone buzzed. The subject line expanded when I tapped the screen. Payment confirmation and welcome packet from Maple Hall Events. The preview mentioned a non-refundable deposit and a vendor list. On the table, the water ring widened and touched the napkin. softening a corner of the old receipt under my glass. I asked the only question that would fit inside a steady voice. Who gave Maple Hall my card? Mom said the motel from last year must have saved it, and she used it to place the deposit quickly before dates disappeared. She talked about how she could not stand the thought of Isabella making do in a church basement. Dad said, we know you have a good limit, and we will pay you back after the shower when gifts come in. Isabella looked hopeful and embarrassed. She whispered that she wanted one day that did not feel like the budget version. Ethan said, real families step up. I heard step and pictured a hole. I kept even. I will help with labor and reasonable costs. I will not be the bank. Mom turned her phone toward me. A post was already live. Peach balloons floated over a stock image of a banquet room. The caption called me the most generous sister and tagged me. Aunt Denise had already written cannot wait. Cousin Mariah had commented that I always come through. The story was being told without me. I asked Mom to take the post down while we talked like adults. She refused and said deleting would look bad. Rick patted the table and said we could settle the money later. Louise set down salads and retreated, reading the room. I opened the email. The deposit line showed a charge against my personal card. The attached contract listed a signer name, Laura's email under it, and a refund policy that sounded final. The napkin edge was wet, and the ink on the old receipt smudged into a gray cloud. My pulse thudded in my wrist. I looked up and found my words again. I am not paying $10,000. I will not host a party I did not agree to. I want the posts down. I want a plan we can afford. The table went silent enough to hear ice settle in other glasses. Ethan's jaw tightened. Isabella stared at her napkin. I turned to Luis and asked for separate checks. He nodded as if he had been waiting for the cue and said he would handle it. The simple request felt like stepping onto solid ground. I set my phone face down and laced my fingers so I would not reach for my card out of habit. The water ring spread until it met the plate's raised rim. The chill on my fingertips surprised me when I moved the glass aside. Notifications bloomed across my lock screen, pings from family threads and distant relatives I barely see at holidays. Someone had shared the post into the cousin group. RSVPs stacked as if a button had been pressed. My name appeared beside phrases like hosting queen and big sister goals. It felt like being dressed by other people while I was still deciding what to wear. I breathed in through my nose and counted to 5, then again, so my answer would not wobble. I stood and caught Luis's eye, then asked if we could talk near the host stand. I needed my check split from the rest, and I wanted the paper receipt. He nodded and made a neat note on the ticket. If I needed the manager, he said. She was close by. As I passed the bar, a song from the 70s drifted over the clink of ice. Near the front door, I called Maple Hall. Marla answered in the calm tone of someone who handles weekend crises. I explained that a booking appeared on my card without my permission. She pulled up the file. The system showed an online payment using a card number, my name typed into the field, and a digital signature tied to the email on the contract. The email belonged to Laura. The deposit was non-refundable per policy, but the contract listed the signer as Laura. What happens when a cardholder disputes a charge they did not authorize? I asked. Marla said the bank decides. If the bank reverses the charge, the venue pursues the signer on the contract. She offered to note the file and hold off on ordering supplies. She followed with an email summary for my records. I thanked her. My heart slowed to a manageable beat. Back at the table, Ethan's voice ran hot. He accused me of ruining Isabella's happiness and making everything about money. Isabella cried quietly from embarrassment. She said she did not want to fight in a restaurant. Mom said I was making a scene and pointed out how much love the posts had already gathered. Dad said dates were filling, and this was the only way to secure something nice. I let the first spike of heat pass. Having money is not the same as owing it to you. The words sat there, plain and heavy. Mom stared. Dad shifted in his seat. Ethan scoffed. Isabella folded her napkin into a hard square. Luis returned with my separate check. I told the waiter I wanted them gone from my check and that I was leaving. He slipped the printed receipt toward me with the discretion of a man who has watched dinners change shape without warning. I folded the paper and tucked it into my wallet against the old grocery receipt with its gray bleed. The small weight steadied me. Mom tried again. You make more than your sister. You are single. This is once in a lifetime. Dad called it an emergency decision because venues disappear. He offered to float me next month. I said I would show up for the baby, but I would not pay for a party I did not agree to, and I would not carry a balance to keep up appearances. Luis waited while I set my card on the tray for my portion only. He brought the slip. I tipped fair, signed, and thanked him. I told my family I was heading out. Ethan muttered that I must enjoy being right. Isabella whispered sorry to the table and looked away. Outside, the night air cooled my face. I sat in the car until the buzzing on my phone slowed. Streetlights painted circles on the hood. My reflection in the window looked like a woman raised to be helpful who had chosen to be fair to herself. Before I drove, I texted the family group chat. I would call the bank in the morning to dispute the charge. All future conversations about money needed to be in writing. I slid the folded receipt deeper into my wallet and started the engine. I woke before my alarm and watched gray light spread across the ceiling. Coffee steadied my hands. At the kitchen table, I opened the Maple Hall email and then called the number on the back of my card. Tanya answered with the patient tone of someone who helps people breathe. I told her what happened. She walked me through a card not present dispute. Had I ever shared the number? No. Had I given permission? No. She sent a link to a fraud affidavit and a secure portal for documents. I filled out the form, entered dates and amount, and uploaded screenshots of the Maple Hall email. I pointed out that the contract listed a signer named Laura and that the contact email on the file was not mine. I made a packet of proof, screenshots of my mother's posts with timestamps and comments, the RSVP count visible on the event page, the contract PDF where Laura's email sits under the digital signature and the refund clause. Marla called back to verify me and agreed to send a log showing the booking IP address tied to the signature. I saved that file and a screen recording of me opening it so the metadata would be plain. I saved copies to a thumb drive and printed a set for my folder. When the upload finished, I wrote a message to my parents and to Isabella. I said I would not pay for Maple Hall, that the bank dispute had begun, and that the venue would work with the signer listed on the contract. I said I loved them and wanted to celebrate. Then I offered a plan I could carry. We could reserve the community center behind the library, or use Dad's backyard if he preferred. We could make potluck food, borrow tablecloths, and wrap mason jars in twine for flowers. I would bake cupcakes, handle invites, set up chairs, and clean until the floor shone. An hour later, Mom posted a vague status about a daughter forgetting what family means. Cousin Tyler wrote that some people only show up for photos. I closed the app. Public space is not a courtroom. Grace called on my lunch break and listened until my words slowed. She helped me write a boundary message for the family thread. Financial decisions require consent, not announcements. If you need help, ask. If I can help, I will say what that help looks like. At work, I accepted a Friday overtime shift to cover a dental bill I had budgeted for. After I logged out, Marla's email arrived. The venue had noted the dispute and would not purchase supplies. Final liability would rest with the signer if the bank reversed the charge. She hoped we would still find a way to celebrate, even if it was not with them. That night, Isabella texted. She said she was humiliated and begged me to let it go. I told her I was sorry this hurt and that I would not argue online. I restated the plan I could support. Saturday afternoon, community center room, simple games, a playlist, cupcakes, and paper flowers. I said I would be at the center by noon either way. If she came, the day would belong to her. I wrote the plan on a notepad and penciled costs. A room fee, ingredients, cardstock, twine, jars, daisies from the store. The total sat under $200. I folded the page and slid it into my wallet against the restaurant receipt. Just before bed, an email from the bank chimed. Provisional credit pending investigation. The number matched the deposit. I set my phone face down. The feeling that arrived was steadier than anger and cooler than relief. It felt like standing on my own floor with my name on the lease. Sunday afternoon, the living room looked staged. Blinds tilted, family photos in a neat grid, a tray of cookies untouched on the coffee table. Isabella and Ethan on the couch. My parents in angled chairs. I took the last seat and set a folder on my knees. We asked about sleep and nursery paint. Mom poured water, even though none of us had asked for it. I opened the folder and spread papers on the coffee table with the care I use at work when I match payment receipts to invoices. I kept my tone even. Here is what the venue sent, I said. A copy of the contract showing Laura as the signer. The email chain with Marla. The bank notice of provisional credit. A printout of venue policies. And here is the written budget for a community center shower. I passed each paper like they were simply ordinary things. Dad leaned forward and squinted as if the fonts were unreasonable. The internet is confusing and contracts are technical, he said. Mom said she did not steal anything. She just moved faster than I would have. Ethan said this was about pride. Isabella said she only wanted one day that looked nice in photos. I spoke in the same tone I use when I tell a customer what a late fee means. I said I would show up for the baby, not for debt I did not choose. I said the bank would decide the card issue and the venue would deal with the signer. I said I was available to make a community center day that was simple and kind. I offered a date and a time. I listed what I would bring. I did not change the size of it to tempt them. I left it reasonable. Then I slid a small envelope across the table. Inside was the spare key to my place, the one my parents asked for years ago in case of emergencies, and then used for drop-by visits that were not emergencies at all. I told them I would be changing the way I let people in. All future financial requests needed to be in writing. Visits needed to be planned. I said boundaries keep love from being mistaken for possession. The line was not a threat. It was a shape. To remove confusion, I called Marla and placed the phone on speaker. She greeted the room and confirmed that the venue recognized Laura as the contracting party and would follow the bank's outcome. She noted that nothing further would be ordered until the dispute was settled, and that any remaining balance would be invoiced to the signer. Dad raised his volume first. He said families handle things privately, and I had brought strangers into our business. Mom's eyes filled, but she held them steady. Ethan stood up and let the screen door slap behind him to the porch. Isabella wiped her face with a tissue, and it left a cloud of lint on her cheek. I looked at each of them in turn and said the sentence that had been waiting since dinner. I love you enough to stop pretending this is okay. The words did not shake. I offered the community center plan one last time. Saturday, 2 to 4. Games and a playlist, cupcakes and paper flowers. I would be there with a key to the room and a broom at the end. Isabella did not commit. She nodded once and stared at her hands. Mom said she needed time. Dad said nothing. I stood, thanked them for listening, and left the cookies where they sat, perfect and unwanted. At the door, I felt the folded restaurant receipt in my wallet press against my palm, a small square of paper that proved I had handled my part with dignity. Saturday, the community center room opened with a key and the echo of steps on scuffed floors. I unfolded borrowed white tablecloths and smoothed the wrinkles with the back of my hand. Mason jars waited in a line. Daisies from the store brightened as soon as they touched water. Grace arrived with a stack of hand-lettered tags and a roll of tape. Aunt Denise came early and hugged me like I had rescued her from an awkward Saturday. 2 cousins followed, arms full of casseroles and a fruit tray that steadied. 2 neighbors from Isabella's building brought diapers and tied twine around jars. The room felt like a place where people could breathe without pretending. Not present were my parents and Ethan. Isabella hesitated, then texted that she could not come because she did not want drama. I told her the door would be open until 4. No reply came. We set out cupcakes on stands Grace had found at a thrift store. We taped garlands along the wall and clipped blank cards to a string for people to write wishes. A borrowed Polaroid camera sat by the gifts for anyone who wanted a small keepsake. A little boy wobbled past with a cookie, looked back to see if anyone would stop him, and kept going. Laughter came easy. I led a simple game that required no buying of prizes, just a sharp ear and quick hands. Children shrieked during musical chairs made from folding chairs. For a few hours, the room felt held together by nothing more complicated than goodwill and sugar. In a pause between songs, my phone lit with an email from Marla. The bank had reversed the deposit. The venue would invoice the signer. She wished us well. I set the phone down and let the information be a quiet fact among paper plates and ribbon. I took photos of the room and sent them to Isabella with a gentle note. The daisies looked bright. I said I would drop off a plate later if she wanted one. I told her again that the room would be open until 4 if she changed her mind. Still nothing yet. We kept welcoming people. We swapped easy stories and washed plates between laughs. When the last guest left, I stood in the doorway. Late afternoon light slanted across the floor. The room smelled faintly of polish and sugar. We stacked chairs against the wall. I rinsed jars in the sink. Grace dried them and set them in a crate. The day had not been the glossy picture some people posted, but it felt human. It was enough. A week later, the bank confirmed the dispute in writing, and the provisional credit became final. Maple Hall sent an invoice to Laura and offered a smaller weekday room. Mom sent a cool text about disappointment. Dad wrote a shorter message, hoping time would soften this. Isabella gave birth 3 weeks early. I brought a meal, left it on the porch, and texted that I could drop by another day. She replied, "Thank you," with a photo of a tiny hand. I stood at the sink and let the quiet stand. Over the next month, I did not answer public posts. I kept my door open for my niece and for any talk that began with respect. On Wednesdays, I walked with Grace around the lake at an easy pace. I set up automatic transfers into my emergency fund. I wrote 3 sentences on a small card. I help by choice. Consent comes before planning. Love does not require debt. I slipped the card behind the folded restaurant receipt in my wallet and pressed the edges flat. When I met my niece, Isabella was tired enough to nap. I held the baby and counted breaths. I rinsed 2 bottles and set them to dry. I left a note that said, "Call me when you are ready for grown-up talk." That night, a text arrived. "I am ready to talk next week." It was not a fix or a grand apology. It felt honest, and that was a start. Here is what I learned. Love is not the same as funding. Boundaries are not punishments. Generosity is strongest when it is chosen, not demanded. If you have felt like your kindness carried a price you never agreed to, you already know why I kept the receipt. Before you go, tell me what part of this story met you where you live. Share your own boundary line in the comments. Tap like and subscribe if plain stories help. and share this with someone who might need steady words tonight. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope your week is gentle.